more than a darn week in New
Oh, I'm
York.
so glad. And really, I think, apply for the Sharp again, and you've done it,
You know,
right?
I've actually never applied for the Sharp because it's a whole year. And I was going to apply, but this is why I'm not going to.
Uh-huh.
Is it's okay. So I thought it was going to be perfect, right? I'd get a studio for a whole year and but they very explicitly say you cannot do another residency if you're in residence there, because what they want you to go to that building and use that studio, a lot. And my plan was, go do McDowell or go do something and then bring the work in and,
Well,
do other things too.
Let me know when it's coming about, because if I'm going to take a trip, you can use my studio, which is a gorgeous studio.
Oh,
right? You can
okay.
use it. I won't charge you for it or anything. It's really a nice studio and it's inexpensive. So
wow.
it's me to have people there when I'm not there.
And is that the one in the Clemente building?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The studio, which I don't want to lose, which is why I need
right.
people to be there when I'm not there. And right now I'm working on prints at the Neiman, why I'm so tired, 24/7. I have a series of 9 prints, and it's an edition of 35 each, and I'm hand coloring each one.
Oh, wow.
So hundreds of like doing.
Is it of the self-portraits?
No, it's years ago I did a series of the only print I've ever made on the Homeric hymn to Demeter.
Right.
I'm very interested.
Did I not see some of those at Stephen Harvey? Yeah.
Yes. And Elizabeth has one actually from that period. It's work from the 80s, but I've always been interested in that lyric, and I won't bore you both why, but I think it's a very timely, particularly because of how young women are questioning patriarchy and sexual abuse and sexual manipulation. And also, it's a story transcending, rather, it's how you Persephone and Demeter have this upheaval aided by the god, engineered by the Olympian gods. But, and so it's really terrible. But at the end of it, they negotiate and find ways and to flourish. And I always makes me cry a little bit because I think it's so moving. Even though it's thousands of years old, it doesn't focus on any static moment in these kinds of situations that so many, both men and women, find themselves in. But how do you go on, after atrocity? And so anyway, that's why I'm doing it. This is something you might want to do because I can see it in your work. They're jigsaw woodcuts.
Oh, wow.
You know what that is, like Munch? Mm-hmm. They're puzzle. The print is a puzzle piece. Have you seen those, Brian? Do you know that?
No, I haven't.
Oh, my goodness.
I haven't seen them, but I mean, I know what you're referencing for Lilian with the Banyan piece, because that was like a jigsaw puzzle to put up in the gallery, and to where the pieces, they fit together, but they don't necessarily, that they're individual pieces.
And this process, I'm such a New Yorker. I'm such an interrupter. I really apologize. It's such a bad quality.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry. I'm recording it, so everybody will be witness
and I'm
to
Cuban,
it.
Susan, so you better watch out. We might be equally matched.
Yeah.
Well, you hand color. So you've got a piece of wood, and you draw the image on the wood, and then somebody, not me, cuts out all of the shapes. And so when it then you ink each piece separately, as did Munch, and put it back together, run it through the press. So it's a way to have several colors in one print without having to do color separation. it's very, very painterly. And I really, I think that would be a great process for you, Lilian.
Well, I mean, that's another thing down the line. I mean, just big picture here is I'm doing a little bit of a reverse, Susanna, because I've always been very envious. I thought that was brilliant, your strategy of only teaching one semester a year. Oh my God. I mean, so I've never been able to do that. So in 2 years, I think that's going to be my thing, is I'm just going to not teach in the fall and just teach in the spring. And that way I will have the fall to do these things, like maybe go to a shop and do an extended project.
Yep. It really made a big difference for me, that change in schedule. And my colleagues hated me for it. But and I encouraged other people to do it. It's much better for the department, because that missing semester brings in new blood. And it is hard, because I had to teach a whole year in one semester, so it's a burnout, but it's still better. That's
what I think.
You still gain in the studio. So,
well, for the record, you and Roger Winter were my models for that, because I thought this is how you can actually keep making, significant bodies of work. And I do see that there is that potential for burnout the semester you're there, but you're right. I think that's right. The light's at the end of the tunnel.
Right. Perfect. You just make it happen and, adjust, it's just, it's better. It's better than the opposite, because teaching full time for over the years, just the routine and the time involved. And now that you're chair, it is, it can just take over your energy. I was full time at Columbia for a couple of years, not for different reasons, but last year I was the director of undergraduate studies for the visual arts program, and just being an administrator, for an artist, it's very hard. Of course, I love the students and I love helping them move on, but the disorganization of art departments creates like needless busy work. And there are those people in academia that just like to generate paper and meetings, and while that was not true at Columbia, there just the organization was not easy for me. You want to help the students, so you get involved. Anyway,
well, those are like three separate jobs. I mean, it is a unique skill to organize and do a long-term plan, but also too is just being present in the moment for the students. And then the third is your studio and building an archive, not just like, oh, I got a break, let me work towards a show, because then it's much healthier to just continue to have continuity in the work. So you're building an archive, which is much different than saying, oh, I got a project now, let me work towards this show. Oh, I got a solo, let me just work towards this show.
It's very different for painters, for people that have pursued installation, which really interests me and is wonderful, but in painting, you're not, generally speaking, painters don't work from project to project. We kind of just work through, and there are moments of like, this is the show, but you don't, because you can just work. In installation, you more or less have to have a location, and you have to have somebody that's going to show the work. Otherwise, there's what do you do? You think about it and write proposals. So we're lucky in some ways to have that studio continuity, continuity of it.
But I have to say that when I saw the show, because I guess I had seen one of your night paintings at Steve Harvey a few years ago. It was a group show, and he had one of your pieces in there, but I think it was one of the bigger small pieces. And so when I saw the show at the Moss, I was actually taken because I wasn't expecting the pieces to be so small and delicate and jewel-like. They were so amazing. But I have to say, I mean, wasn't that like my first response? I was like, oh my God. It's like, and so I have to say, I'm also a little envious because, you know, for me, portability is not a thing, at least not yet. And I mean, it's portable in that it fits in my truck, but there's all this other baggage that I bring to my painting practice that I still want to squeeze out, right, you know, while I can still do it. And so that is part of my kind of vision for this next year, is to really create a couple more, 2 or 3 more big conglomerate multi-panel pieces in, you know, 2 or 3 areas, and then kind of work through that, right, to see what that becomes.
I am holding my heart because I remember the first time I saw you and your truck out in the forest in Johnson, Vermont, along this dirt road in an old swamp. Yep. And there is Lilian in her truck and covered in paint and boots and working so hard in that location. It was so moving. I think I just happened upon you. I wish I had taken photographs. Then I didn't have, you know, it was before iPhones.
Yeah,
but
we didn't see a lot of that.
This is a late 90s. Late
96.
96.
Yeah, so I was I had just gotten a Mid-America Art Alliance NEA. That was like the last year. That was that whole, after that they got rid of the NEA stuff. But part of what getting one of these regional NEAs meant was that the Vermont Studio Center would invite you to be a fellow there, you know, one of their nice fellowships for a month. And so what I did is, we didn't have sabbaticals at UT. I took a leave without pay that fall. And I went up to Vermont and took advantage the studio center for the fall. I had never painted anything in the fall. So it was the fall season of 1996. And I was lucky because Susanna was one of the visiting artists. So she came and gave a talk on her work. And, and I had seen her work. I mean, I've been familiar with your work since undergrad because you're a great painter. And I've always, and I was a figurative painter for a long time, remember? But also just the painting quality. So that was just, that was unplanned. I just got lucky. Right. And so that was our first meeting.
Me too.
Yeah.
Oh, it was this, and actually coincidentally, 96 was the first year I started making night paintings.
No.
Yes. Yes. That is really amazing. And I won't say the energy of your paintings was not inspiring to me. It certainly was. Because and you'll understand this, both of you, for various reasons, I had a situation where I had to earn a lot of money, and my family. And we all know home care costs a lot of money. And so I took every job, every lecture job, everything, and I was, besides my full-time teaching job. So I was a little tapped out in the studio because I was away so much. So on my way, I had this Vermont job, and on my way, I stopped at the Yale Art Gallery, and I saw Millet's painting Starry. He has a night painting of Starry Night. And it's the painting that was very important because Van Gogh loved Millet. And one knows he saw that painting or such paintings. And there it was, Starry Night. And I thought, oh, I shouldn't swear. Heck, darn, wow. I thought, oh, I can paint landscape at night. And well, after I finished teaching, I could do my studio visits and then go out at night, and then I can paint while I'm teaching. And it organized it allowed me to do 2 things at once. And so it was that year, because we both had trucks. I had my truck, and I think Tina Brown was there, not the magazine Tina Brown, the other Tina Brown. And we went out at night and painted, and that was the beginning.
Wow.
So that's really funny. But I will never forget seeing you paint. It was truly wonderful. It was so inspiring to me.
Well, I have actually painted 2 night paintings in my life, and I don't have them anymore, but they were actually part of the original Skowhegan installation, where I was making a bunch of small on-site work, and I realized I really wanted it to be this montage, and I liked them, close together. And I had some that were a little more representational and some that were a little more abstracted, but I wanted the center part of my studio to actually have a sort of crescendo, or some sort of, or the opposite of the crescendo, right? A hot, and so I thought, well, what if I make on the angle walls all green paintings, one warm green and one all cool green. And then I thought, and then I can flank them with a warm dark night painting and a cool night painting. And then in the middle, I wanted a red sort of vaginally shaped, I went around, I found a tree that had what I thought was, a nice opening that I had some backlight come in, and I painted that one only with reds and blacks and whites. And so I had this very, the whole studio was set up in this kind of installation. I had a long red bench with a little black rock at the end of it, where you sat on and you couldn't get, but so those 5 kind of semi-monochromatic, but it was interesting painting at night because, it's hard. As you know, right. You have to have that balance of light, but not too much light. And
I find it so easy. Yeah. I find I get and it's why they're small, because I hold the paint. I have a flashlight. Sometimes I stick it in my bra. Sometimes I'll put it in my head, and I can look at the paint. I have one here.
Yeah. And actually, Brian, if you, I don't know, but on my Instagram, I actually recently posted something of with some Skowhegan stuff, and there might even be a picture of it. Yeah, actually, on one of my recent posts from the Skowhegan Gala, the 3rd image, you can actually see that red painting and the 2 night paintings behind me from that.
Wow.
Okay, well, send me that image, and I'll,
okay.
Because when we kind of produce and edit, we can always put some slides and there you go.
Okay. So it is the painting. You can't see the painting, but this is how big they are for the people at the show. But I can hold the painting and paint. With the flashlight painting. And then I can put the flashlight on the palette.
Right.
And so I switch from the palette to the painting with the flashlight, and it's very easy for me. And I love being outside doing that. It is sitting with night is something that very few of us do. But as you know from your experience, it's very peaceful, different things, different animals, different sounds of a place that's, I only paint places that are ordinary to me.
Right.
Wherever I am.
Yeah. See, I do the same thing. Do you want to talk about why that is? Because I also do that, and I have my own reason for it. So I'm curious why you do that.
You think? Oh, okay. Well, it's just that I think that's one of the functions of art. One of my favorite authors, Primo Levi, he wrote The Periodic Table, something I recommend to everyone. But recently I read another book, which not everyone will like, but I adored. It's called The Monkey's Wrench, and it's stories of an engine, a rigger, like a construction worker. So he's telling Levi about what he does, and it can't be more prosaic. It just can't. It just isn't. What he's saying is so prosaic. It's stunning. But of course, in Primo Levi's telling of it, it's riveting. I couldn't put the effing book down. It was so fascinating. So, I think this is something that art does, that has the ability to do if we immerse ourselves, and not everybody. Some people, it's their calling to work with a spectacle. But for me, my calling is to work with the ordinary, the everyday, the usual, the unglamorous, and look at it and show that. Because, of course, we live in particularly right now, a society that is a little drunk on spectacle. And you can see at least, your work is about this, a degradation of the environment, or the lack of paying attention and seeing each other, our ordinary people that are around us every day, not paying attention to them. And, it's wonderful to do that. It's one of the great joys of life. So that's why I do that. So you tell me.
Well, no, and I think that's, I mean, you say it more, within a broader context. I love how you almost always include everything you talk about within a sort of literary umbrella and other types of things. And it's something I love about you. I do it because of a couple things. One is that I think part of me not feeling like I, really belong or am from a place, when you go to a place that's not, quote, the view, right? People have expectations of the view, right? And they don't really spend a lot of time looking at it, right? They expect, and I can't compete with nature. I don't want to compete with nature. That's bullshit. So what I do is, if I go to a place that everyone else just doesn't pay attention to, but I bother to look at it all day, then I am, it's revealing itself over time to me, and I'm making a type of connection, which then I get to share with other people about something that they normally would not have thought was interesting, right? And yet there I am looking at something which may not be, the view, but it's a view, and it's an interesting enough view that I spent time with it. So I'm making a connection. But I think also people have fewer expectations of something that's not fitting certain standards of what they think is supposed to be a better view than another one, right? And then I think there's this, for me also, I think there's a formal element to it that you'll notice I often don't paint like a landscape with a calm section or a real open, real obvious sort of foreground, middle ground, and background. And I think a little bit of that is, it's that same sort of expectation, right? If people think they understand the illusion of something too quickly, then they don't see the painting surface and the process, and it doesn't break down. And I really like that perceptual push and pull. So I think that there is kind of a personal, kind of emotional, psychological level to it. And then there's this kind of, for me, formal layer of just, letting things reveal and kind of being able to be cumulative about it. And sometimes places that seem less, quote, interesting, you just have to work harder, right? They are interesting, right? There's something there. Right. So yeah, and I think then people are sort of like surprised, right? And I think there's also less of a disappointment, because you can't, I will never paint the Grand Canyon. I will never attempt to paint the Grand Canyon, right? You just can't. Right. But I might paint a rock or two around the Grand Canyon or something,
I can see that. I wanted to also add, because when one is looking at your work, it's also the gloriousness of the glory of the paint. So you're seeing a place which is, tangled. It isn't manicured. It's not the Boboli Gardens, but it's the paint is glorious. And so that also, kind of celebrates, just like it says, oh, pension, this is so beautiful, it's so rich, so dense. Do you think, because both of us came from rather, unglamorous backgrounds, that this has become so, we've had the ability to do this?
Well, maybe, but I guess I think also we're a bit too young. I think, if we had been born, 30 years earlier, or, 40 years earlier, I think we would have been badass abstract expressionist painters, right? I think, Joan Mitchell, you and I would have been hanging out together, throwing paint around like no one's business, right? But I think that, we came a little late to that game. And I think, but yet we both have this love of paint. And then for me, going back to this thing about maybe more common backgrounds, is I've never liked the elitist sort of sometimes positioning of art where if you don't know the background, little secret story behind it, there's no way that visually you can understand it, right? And so, I mean, it's not that I don't appreciate purely conceptual art or art that was at the cutting edge, Malevich, or I mean, of course I can understand why it's important and all of that, but for me, I wanted maybe because I can't write so well, or, this whole act of wanting to communicate, is I wanted to make things that were as broadly understandable as possible, and yet could speak to different people within that. So I think for both you and I, right, having a representational, your work is very representational. It is very specific. It is not just a person. It is you. When you do a self-portrait, it is clearly you, not me. Right.
Yes.
And so you want and achieve a level of specificity that I admire. Right. And yet I never look at your painting without seeing the paint and seeing the process. And I can break down in my head how you might have created that image. And that's exciting to me, because I always want both, right? I don't want an image that mysterious, it's the magical, that the surface disappears, because I'm like, well, a painting is not just the representation of an image, it's also the surface, and it's also that surface was created through a process. So if I can have all three of those things be evident at once and not undermine each other, I get really excited, right, about painting.
I think you certainly do. I've never, in all the years I've known your work, have known your work not to be physically riveting and iconographically compelling, because again, it's just what you were saying about trying to work with an image that is perhaps hasn't been seen before, or an image that doesn't fit the conventions of landscape. That is, you got the sky up there and it's cobalt blue, and then you have viridian trees and a middle ground, et cetera, all of that bad landscape painting. And yet your paintings are just filled with the energy that one finds in such tangly places that are so often unobserved, uncelebrated, and unimaged. It's I wish I knew more about what young people see now, because it is so different than when I came up, because there's so many images.
Right.
When there's just more pictures. When in my childhood, in the 50s and 60s, there just weren't that many images. Magazines might have some photos, usually black and white. There might have been some illustrations. In the New York Times, very few photographs. There just weren't many images. And now there are images everywhere. It's really so different.
It is different, but I definitely think that I appreciate all sorts of different work, and I don't think that perceptually based work is, better. I just think it's different. But for me, it's important, and it's what I want to do because of my own baggage and interests, right? And but I think that at the end of the day, I think going back to your work and my work, I don't think anyone would ever look at either of our paintings and think they were done from a photographic or flat static image. Right. And so,
that's really important.
Yeah. And so I think that, and so that is what it is, right? It's not that, sure, do we work about an image and about signifiers and all this stuff? And then but I want to know, I see a lot of work where I know it's coming from a photographic source and it's about the photographic source, and that's fine. But mine is almost like this, there was, I think it was Peter Badea, who was the director curator of the Huntsville Museum. They wrote a little essay for a solo show I had back in, I forget now, 2000. Anyway, who knows? It doesn't matter. But anyway, he wrote this nice little catalog, and in it, he heard me talk about the process, and I made some side comment of, I think I'm kind of a performance artist, right? Kind of durational, thinking of, because
durational,
because people want to, maybe you've heard this too to some point, but people often want to stick me in the sort of Monet or Impressionist slot, because my edges are a bit fuzzy. Right. I think that's what they think that means. And it's like, well, Monet famously said that after 7 minutes, he could notice the light change, and he wanted a sense of light. And I don't want a sense of light. I want the experience of the whole day. Right. So what does the experience of the whole, what does something look like if you're looking at it all day? And the thing is, I don't have an answer to that. And there isn't any one answer. Right. But that's what
vitality in your painting.
Yeah, but that's what perceptually based work kind of allows us to do, is because everything is relative. That I know that, you probably made one color because something else was working, or, what, you make, it's all this relativeness that we have to juggle because we don't have a flat static image that we're working from.
And in addition, photography, I mean, I love photography,
Yeah.
and I'm not in any way against using photographs as a source material, but for me, there are a few things that, unless the painting is worse than the photograph, and then we should just have the photograph. Is that what you're saying about duration? One has to make decisions about the whole day, like where are things going to rest? And for me, sometimes, the self-portrait might take several years,
Right.
5 or 6 years, maybe more. Often not, but things change during that time. And what is that image? What is the negotiation with time? And that struggle is interesting. It's like having time is a formidable opponent. And I love that.
And you're always behind, time. It always wins.
I think it is always offering different information. And then I can decide whether I'm going to stick with the past or go with what's in front of me at the moment. So that kind of decision, I make a lot of mistakes, but those mistakes then make the painting. And so that particular, it's not everyone's struggle, but it is mine. I was in Giverny this last spring. I'd never been there, and why would some go? But a friend, Heidi Howard, who's a wonderful artist, she and Esteban de Cabeza Tabaca, whose work you also may know, terrific painters. They invited me because Heidi was in the Terra Foundation, and she had access to the garden. So they said, "Oh, come." And I did. And I thought, well, I would have never gone to Giverny, but it was one, because it turns out Bonnard lived in the next town, Verona, which is the working class suburb of Vernon, and all in Normandy. And there was so many things about it that were, you could see that when Monet moved there, obviously it wasn't so glamorous, but the light is the pleasure. The landscape is beautiful in the sense that there's wildflowers and there's scent in the air, and color everywhere, even in the gardens that are not cultivated, just walking through the forest. And I thought, oh, well, here he is. And he went through 2 world wars there, or at least he certainly went through the first, but there was a lot of turmoil during his time, during his life. And it wasn't an easy road to hoe, let's say, historically. But you could see the kindness of that landscape. It sort of ate away at the rough edges, and that was such a wonderful experience to just work in a place where it was just, there wasn't a lot of abrasion. I was coming back to your grant at the NEA, because we're one of the only countries that does not have a Ministry of Culture. We might be the only country that doesn't have a Ministry of Culture. And you could see in this place, and then you go to Bonnard's house, it's also, now it's still unglamorous, but the celebration of this environment for both of them, and also the way that the nation itself made room. Because Clemenceau, they're making room for the life of an artist, the home of an artist. And yes, it brought tourists, but when their properties were preserved, or when Gustave Moreau's studio was preserved, it wasn't for a tourist site. It was for the belief that a place where art is made can tell us something about the art, and that the art of that artist is important. And the United States really lacks that.
Yeah.
In a way. Earlier, Brian and I were talking about monuments, which fascinate me.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a great subject, because I won't go off on a tangent, but what is what really, is a suitable monument that can kind of speak, or to give a sense of place and aura to the people that live there, because most monuments are about humans. But your paintings are also monuments to trees. They're the organic world, and I think of them that way also. But I think this, as a painter, I feel sad in a way, because their paintings need houses, and houses can't be monuments. But here, these two artists left gardens and that are monuments, and I was just thinking monuments that way.
Yeah, when we were talking about monuments, it's also just as like how does history, how can a landscape tell a history when it can't speak? And when we put a monument in, who is that monument speaking to? And so that was why I was thinking about, Lilian, your Plein-Aired Histories, and how that was that was like you adjacent to your identity, and talking about how you approach landscape to speak to a place of longing, to where you didn't grow up in Cuba, you grew up in Texas, and you were trying to with your Hecho con Cuba series, and you were, in that way, was your way of trying to experience that place. And I have to, I know this is a tangent, Lilian, but there was a comment in the comment book, and I have to read this, and we can talk about it, because it deals with sense of place in each of us. And this was written in the show. It says, I'll read it. It says, "I see myself in these works as a first-generation immigrant. I completely understand the desire to make art from the soil of your homeland. I grew up in the U.S. and realized that I've always been looking for a sense of place, feeling a yearning for my home country, but knowing there isn't really a future for me there. Feeling a yearning for something that dangles right in front of my face, and yet I feel shut out of it. So much that you want to take it and make something with it. Feeling invited in, but not expected to stay. Life has been complex, and I felt like the only way to express that complexity is through this step-by-step process orientated art, where each little section exists on its own, separate from the rest of the picture. I'm glad somebody else understands."
Oh, wow.
I just
yeah, you're going to have to send me that.
I scanned it for you. They didn't sign it, but I saw they were speaking about the Banyan. They were speaking about the Hecho con Cuba with the soil. So
that's so moving.
Yeah. Well, it's I mean, it's I used to, for a long time, not talk about anything deeper than formal concerns in my work, and I know where that comes from. I mean, I'm talking about timing to when one is born, right? If I had been younger, right, it'd be totally about that, right? But I grew up with, it was all Bauhausian, less is more, and but I'm a hard-headed person, and I would fight back, because I always thought, no, I think more can be more, right? I know where that's coming from, right? But what I didn't understand is some of my sensibility, maybe about wanting to hyphenate, or, I called myself a conjunctivist, a maximalist before that was a word, right? Was I wanted to turn those things that were used in a negative way into positive, because I thought, more can be more, right? There's not one pie, you just make more pies, right? You learn to make a pie with a different ingredient, right? Now you got yet another delicious pie in the world. Why does everything have to fit into this one mold? And, and being I'm yes, I'm a light-skinned Latina, but I have dark hair and dark eyes, and and I didn't fit a certain model, and so there was always this not fitting in, not being Cuban enough, not being, and this is pretty typical of immigrants, and I would say it's even probably not untypical of people who you might consider long-term Americans, right? If they've moved places, right? I think America in general doesn't, people here don't tend to have a legacy of generations of place, right? At least not if you're probably more affluent, or up in, if you went off to college and then got your job wherever that job was, a different part of the country. So, the vastness of America, I think, complicates this idea of place. And today, we don't want to go on another tangent, how that's become even more complicated. But this is, I guess I was a little nervous, like as I wouldn't talk so much about that, because I thought, it's there, it's the deep part of the onion, right? My work's always been like an onion to me, right? And I'm happy if you can get through the first couple rounds, and if you want to go deeper, great. But I've now there's language around, hybridity and things that don't need to fit together all the time. So I do talk more about that, but the dirt stuff, the Hecho con Cuba pieces were, I've never actually shown them much, because I actually thought maybe this is too big of a jump for people, but to me it made sense conceptually, right? If I'm, and the reason why I'll backtrack a bit, the reason why I was nervous about it is, having built a career, I mean, at least in my mind, a career, right, of being a perceptually based person, right, artist. And then how can you do work about a place if you're no longer there looking at it? Am I still that artist? Am I now a kind of, where's the thread for me, right? So the pigment, the dirt, right, the using that as the way to create the image of a place I'm no longer at. I'm still using the place. So conceptually, I'm still an on-site or of the site artist, right? So for me, all the artwork has to make sense to the creator. I mean, once it's out of our hands, we can't control what other people see in it, but at least for us, we have to have it make sense. And so when I realized that the only way that I really did want to be able to paint images of Cuba that I had at least seen firsthand, even if I took them from a photograph or remembered them or something else, or saw them of an image of another Cuban artist painting on site in the Cuban Museum. So, I have these different iterations, kind of like, I think about Gerhard Richter in some ways, right? And he was very influential, actually, he was a big one. So I've come to terms with the idea of how can I expand beyond only physically having to be in a place, while still thinking about this idea of being in a place as the core meaning of the work. So, but yeah, the Cuban dirt pieces, I had that reaction. I had a similar reaction in Tampa, which I would expect, because there's a lot more Cubans. People, those were pretty powerful pieces to, but I'm grateful that they were shown together, because this is really the first time that so many different series were shown together, and I think that they held up just fine. It's still one artist in the room, right? Yeah,
but it seems to me, in thinking of the kind of your work over the years, and this, one can see this in certain artists, that the work becomes younger as the artist themselves becomes older, that your attitude of like doing what needs to be done for you, for the work itself, that has just continued to expand for you. And that's really great to see. And of course, for others, how meaningful.
Yeah, well, and I guess I was thinking that you must have had a little bit of that same feeling when you being known for your self-portraits for so long, and then you move into landscape. That had to have been a little bit of a sort of, similar kind of maybe questioning or shift in terms of, the idea of how that ties together with this idea of looking and reflecting on time.
I never thought of showing them. It was like a
Yep.
hobby. It was my sport.
Oh,
Night painting was my sport. So I never thought of showing them until, Stephen said, "Oh, I don't want to show your portraits. I want to show these night paintings." And I thought, well, okay. I don't know. It's just that I have. It's not that much of a move because I'm still painting, and so I have these little different projects that have always gone on. I'm painting women in their, women artists and writers studios, and doing the prints, et cetera, but they don't. What you're doing, which is formally expanding, is different. I think it was more adventurous, and kind of has such a liberated spirit. I think of one of my favorite artists, Louise Bourgeois.
Oh, yeah.
She could make marble hands beautifully rendered, or a big 20-foot piston, or some little rag dolls, or a sculpture made out of mucilage. That breadth of use of material is something I see developing in your work, and it's really, really wonderful, and it's so youthful, or what we associate with youth.
Well, I'm glad that there's more of those in my mind that are coming. It's just so next year there'll be a tsunami of finger painting going on there, because who doesn't want to stick their fingers in paint, with a glove, of course.
Yeah.
Everybody.
So Susanna, speaking with the self-portraits, and now that Lilian's got her Hecho Cuba, I kind of wanted to talk about, each of yours relationship with the foreground and background paint, because with your self-portraits, you're painting yourself. It's like usually from the shoulders up. So you're not occupying usually the whole canvas. So therefore the background, which a lot of times is an imagined landscape, or does...
Well, no, sometimes it's projected, or it's really there, or I have a huge photo mural made of a location to put in back of me. It's a little insane.
That's why they seem so real.
There you go.
Totally insane. But well, I don't think
so you really weren't standing in front of that city burning behind you?
No, I was sitting in front of the photo or the video of it burning behind me. But I'll segue for a minute. I just saw the Werner Herzog elegy for the craft, the Crafts, who were these great photographers. They were scientists, but they loved volcano. Their scientific research was they were volcanologists, but they were also known because they did these iconic, this imported films of volcanoes in exploding, and all of everything that happens around a volcanic explosion. And I was looking at that the day before yesterday and thinking, whoa, they were really there. Oh my goodness, it looks so close. Anyway, I don't think of it as background, because I paint, it takes me hours, days, weeks to establish the figure-ground relationship. So this is very nerdy, but I think particularly for students, it's important, because, bad portraiture is where we're seeing the primary signifier, and everything else in the painting doesn't have anything to do with that primary signifier. So I spend more time setting up even if there's just like a half an inch, I spend more time setting that up and getting that relation right than I do because I have to set up the lights and everything. The paintings are very staged. But it is to create a meaning between an unsignified area and a signified area. And so that's the story of the painting, although people may not be aware of it. It's really not the story of me or the face, because if you take that part away, the whole narrative of this simple image falls apart. And my students are always, worn out by me yelling at them because you just want to paint the head, and they'll say, I'll get the rest later. And, it's not like that you have to find meaning in the insignified or the secondarily signified, and be it's a huge opportunity for expression. And when people think of it just as background, and I find those kinds of paintings very, very unsatisfying. And so that's
this is interesting that you say that, Susanna, because I might be a failed portrait painter, because I actually was, I think I mentioned it, I was always very attracted and still am to figurative painting, hence, you and, Lucian Freud and, Frank Arb. I mean, there's just I really basically only looked at figurative art through college. And that's what I started doing when I was in Skowhegan is I was painting, but the model wasn't that available. They were often a little tipsy, didn't show up. And I found that because I'd grown up in Houston and was kind of in a concrete part of town, I was really enjoying the looking and at this varied, because Skowhegan has very varied landscape. And so finally it occurred to me, the first month I was just painting these, imagine fit, blah, blah, blah. And I said, why don't I just paint what I'm looking at? And I literally started painting the landscape in Skowhegan. And part of the reason I did that was I was frustrated with the figure, that I wanted this sense of abstracting, but I wasn't interested ever in the background. I never quite figured out how to reconcile the background. To me, the background was just what you said. It was just the background. And I couldn't figure out how to make the background as important or as interesting for me as the figure. And so I would go bigger and bigger. So of course, Chuck Close's post-aneurysm, paintings are, I think, amazing because they have this perceptual activeness, right? But, he works from a static image, and I really enjoy something that actually changes. So there's a kind of different way to approach this kind of perceptually active painting. But anyway, I digress on that. But going back to this, so to me, the dense landscape was where the figure and the ground exchange could be pushed the most, because with a figure, at least for me, Susanna, since I wanted to distort something, the only way you could distort a face before it looked distorted.
Yes.
Right. Was then you had to go humongo, right? So I wanted, I guess, more materiality or paint and strokes, but I didn't want to make Francis Bacon-like images. I wanted to make very specific, kind of like yours, right? More, portraits that were very specific and captured an essence of a person and all this other stuff. And I couldn't do it. And then all of a sudden I realized that this dense landscape, you can have a mark. I could make a mark that literally looked like it was a mile away and yet was also at the same time right on the surface in your face, popping off. And so there was this real, active interchange, right, with dense landscape that I found in Skowhegan that I never found I was never able to do in the figure, and I never looked back. Right. I never looked back.
Story, because I similarly had a conversion experience, and I think it's good for young people to hear this. It's wonderful for me to hear it, because I see everything you say and everything that you wanted. You can see in your paintings, you really got it, in spades. I was just making self-portraits. I got a job right out of graduate school at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I had never, I grew up during the death at painting period. Right. So I had very little information. I'm obviously at Yale. There was Bill Bailey and Lester Johnson. But I really didn't have a lot of information about how to work from observation. And so I was going to teach figure painting. And I thought, I better figure out how to do it. At the same time, I was making those huge, which you've probably not seen, 10, 20-foot paintings that were based on the Homeric hymn to Demeter, that same theme prints are about now. And they were very gestural, semi-abstract, et cetera, a lot of paint, huge. And I had a tiny, tiny career in Chicago with that, but that's what I thought of as my work. But at the same time, I'm like painting myself because I couldn't afford models at $12,000 a year. Yep. And so I just painted myself to be a better teacher.
Mhm.
And until one day, I was working on this was years, it was like 4 years I was doing this. And one day, I'm going to digress briefly and quickly. One of my main inspirations since I was first started painting had to do with the art of West Africa and the masking traditions.
Oh, yes.
Because it's why I was interested in the human figure. So I realized in that tradition there was the understanding that the human face could signify for all aspects of behavior, spiritual, political, emotional, etc., that the rearrangement of certain features and the use of certain materials could really bring forth so many areas of meaning. And I was always in awe of, I still am, and very interested in, that's my art historical background. Mm-hmm. But how to get that into my paintings wasn't happening really, in those big story paintings, no. But all of a sudden, when I painted this one painting, I realized I could keep going. I could see neutral color as color and not just tone, blah, blah, blah. All sorts of things came together in one painting that doing what all the other work I had been doing for the last, sort of 15 years did not do. And I just gave it all up. I thought, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to do this because I can see.
Double down, yeah.
I could see I was able to live up to my aspiration and live up to the influences that had informed who I wanted to be as an artist, what I wanted the work to mean. So it was really like you say, same story. This is very funny, that I was sort of backwards. I stepped into the self-portrait sort of backwards. And I thought, I'm never going to sell another painting. I'm never going to have another show. Who's going to look at someone else's self-portraits? But, you have to do what you do. Yeah. That's very funny, Lilian. I can see it in that Skowhegan landscape. It's so second growth, so dense, and so anti-picturesque.
Yeah, I mean, it solved it solved a formal and just as I said, I was interested in the figure, not the background. So how do you make a painting? Yeah, how do you make a painting? That's only half a painting. I need both parts to make a painting. I got to figure that out, right?
Oh, that's really wonderful. Brian, in terms of monuments, I think your other work also, your installation pieces deal with this, that this is a problem with a lot of monuments. They don't, they're not about the whole place. It's plopping something down. And they just did this, like, I would say, horrible statue, and it's supposed to be for women, very bad figure, like the worst kind of figurative sculpture of female figures in bronze around a table in Central Park. I don't know if you've seen it. And I thought, haven't we had Maya Lin? I mean, haven't we?
Yeah. And that is interesting. That's where, like, abstraction, it leaves it open. It leaves it open for people to put their stories or to project themselves into the work. And I guess if you want figurative work, you go to Italy, right?
But even with Maya Lin's piece, it's amazing. It's amazing. And yet still ended up putting a figurative piece a few yards away, right? Because some people it was like, I don't care if I don't see a representation, I feel offended. Or I don't feel like it's really about me or a person. And so it is interesting because even with the success of her piece, which no one would argue now that it's not like does even more than any other monument, has done in terms of war monuments, it still had to have this secondary figurative thing by someone else to satiate. So it's interesting, how.
There's Magdalena Abacanovich. I don't.
Oh yes,
her work does it. There are a few people that can do it, and Antonio Lopez Garcia.
Mhm.
He was able
Well,
to do that. But
yeah,
not
and also Kehinde Wiley's, piece in front of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, which speaks to that conversation and creates a space
yeah.
for a different type of monument to represent, the people that those previous monuments weren't speaking to. And also where the placement of these monuments in front of courthouses and places of institutions. So, I mean, all those things come into that. But what you mentioned, right, these castings of the bodies, and they would have the concavities, like they were shells. They were like shells that weren't filled, or at least when I was looking at her work, and dealing with experience. This is World War II.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Kara Walker's piece, which was unfortunately temporary, of course, it should have, and it had to be, but what an amazing monument.
Yeah.
But they're few and far.
And I can't remember
right.
the name of
the one in the Domino Sugar Factory. Is that
yeah. No, I got to see that one. Yeah, I have pictures in a very strategically placed section of that sculpture. And I can't remember the name of this artist, but I remember seeing, this is where your Instagram fingers go crazy, but there was some sort of large plinth that was mirrored. And I believe it was in some sort of New York, or at least northeastern place. And I thought that was actually rather clever, right? Having a big plinth in the middle of some sort of park and having it be reflective. And so, because, we really are ultimately.
Oh, how wonderful. I have not seen that, but were I to design a monument, which I probably will not be, but it's really, that's a great, at first I had this very misplaced idea, because if you recall, there's a walkthrough at 14th Street from the 1 train to the F train, and it's just like the most dismal hall.
Bad, yeah.
And dirty, like only a New York subway can be. And I thought, I should do a proposal for, I was thinking of mirrors and children walking through, seeing themselves. But then I thought, oh my God, New Yorkers walking through at rush hour, the cacophony and confusion. This would be the worst, most disorienting public sculpture that I could possibly design. It would be a behavioral nightmare.
It definitely, that's interesting.
Oh, well.
Yeah. So, Susanna, I want to touch on something you said, how you felt like your night paintings were your hobby or your sport, like your practice. And then also your artists working in the studios and stuff, because this ties into the show, the Metropolis that you organized. And when I, invited you to do a show because Lilian was showing her, first I invited you both because I really wanted to have you two together to have these conversations, even if you were showing your self-portraits. But when you heard that Lilian would be showing her landscapes, you wanted to show your night paintings. Yet you just said here that you just felt like they're your hobby, like they're different. Is that why you, besides the scale of the work, how small they are, is why you said, oh, I want to invite all these other people to show with me?
I'm so glad you asked that. No, I don't think of them as a sport, just a sport anymore. And I should, because it made it better for me. Because once I started showing them, people like them. And, I think they make some kind of contribution, and it encourages more people to paint at night or sit outside at night. No, I did that because when in exhibitions, what I like is when there's when art creates like a contrasting conversation. So I'm thinking of the specificity and the scale and the subject matter of Lilian's work. I thought that my own work wouldn't be as interesting. That maybe something about urbanity or the chaos of urbanity. And there's a certain aspect to Lilian's work that has to do with chaos and order. And her paintings, although they are of the landscape without mostly human habitation, they are so inhabited. They're dense, like New York City. They have a density, and they have a chaotic aspect to them, but it's a beautiful chaos. And that's how I feel about New York. And so I thought, oh, well, I don't want to just show a lot of my little cityscapes. It doesn't in a way create a conversation, to my mind's eye. Thank you, COVID, for not letting me go down, with Lilian's work. So I wanted to make an exhibition that had to do with what I feel is so central to her work, and I couldn't do it with my own work. So I know all these other artists, and I thought, oh, this person could speak to the scale of Lilian's work. So I really thought about a show that would create energy with Lilian's work, and I felt that my work alone wasn't interesting enough in a way as a conversation with the work for a large space such as your this beautiful art center. Oh my God. So that's why I decided, I asked you if that would be all right to I thought, say, there's certain people like Susan Chen, her work is very gutty and painterly, and there was the kind of sense of time and the work about the pencil drawing, huge crazy pencil drawings of the artifacts of the city, et cetera, et cetera. And then Stepan's crazy people in the parks. I just felt like there was a sense of chaos and order in this group that would stimulate the conversations that I find in Lilian's work. So that was my thought about it. And I just felt like my work wasn't enough. Just wasn't, the vibe wasn't quite enough.
No, it turned out great, because I mean, of course, I trust you completely. When you said that, I was like, okay. And then I'll just make it look pretty. And so
and it was a beautiful sort of counter thing, thinking about the idea of urbanity. I thought it was kind of a brilliant move. I was like, oh, that's a smart move, because it's it's all environment, right? And even and we're the ones, whether we're building it or we're interacting in it, right? The humans have both of those experiences. So you really created the full environment. You really brought it full circle. So it was really fabulous.
Well, I was hoping, because your gallery is so involved with the school. Say if this had been a museum, I would have done something different. But because this is like a really important university, it's a tech place, and the students are of certain experiences, and some of them will be building cities. And some of them, will hopefully engage with the wilderness. So I was thinking of the constituency of the Moss Center, also that I wanted an experience that would be, fun, helpful, stimulating for them.
No, it worked out. I mean, because we had the School of Agriculture, they had classes come through, the architects, and then also too, one of the benefits of the summer is there's a summer academy of all the first year design, industrial design architects, their first time away from home. Like, I mean, they still look like 17, 18-year-old, and then to me, they look like they're 12, but they're coming in and just experiencing all this stuff. And then we had all these summer camps that came from all these different counties, because being in Southwest Virginia. So yesterday, with our current shows with Steve Locke, his portraits, his daily practice of painting, which was wonderful thing. See, we got some heads in there, Susanna.
Oh,
So you
yeah.
got and it is, and we had like 100 fifth graders in from the different counties, and we always ask them, is like, is this your first time in an art gallery or a museum? And like half of them are just raising their hand. And so this is like their first experience coming in there. So that's why it's just so wonderful to show as many perspectives, backgrounds as possible to open them up, because the fact is they don't get that in their day to day. And it prepares them. I mean, there was a couple that said they'd been to New York City, so they were excited in case they wanted to go see Steve or Craig's other show. But there's a lot of kids where their first experiences with art are actually in this space. And so that's why it was wonderful to have like all these different, a global perspective, with Stepan and Susan and Yuri, even, but also different parts of the state, with Ian with Detroit, and Matthew with New York, Lindsay, showing Harlem, even though she it's connected and from Virginia. So that was and also the scale, which is too, the contrast and the scale from Lilian's work to your work as well. Yeah, and also the different scales with the spaces. All these things are the visitors and these students don't necessarily know until it sits with them and stuff.
Yes.
And then
so important.
Yeah. So to get back to like that point with abstraction and like sitting with something and not knowing whether they're sitting in the gallery or outside the gallery, it takes time for it to reveal itself to you. And that's what reminded me when you were talking. I listened to one of your podcast interviews, Susanna, before, and you talked about excavation and seeing it in a book.
Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah.
That was it was 1959, Art in America. And for some reason, my parents had gotten a subscription to Art in America in the 50s. There was a big, in the art world, there was a whole thing about American US folk art. And maybe that was why they got the subscription. Who knows? But I opened the thing and there was I opened the book and there was a picture of excavation. That great, that amazing de Kooning. And I kept looking at it. I just didn't know what it was. And I kept going back to look at it. And the way that and this is what I love about abstraction, and really, it was my first love, because it matched something I felt, something I knew to be true. There was chaos, but there was also seemed as if there was something, like there were two spaces in the painting. There was sort of that vanilla black paint, and then there seemed to be an underlying, what I later found out were feet, once I got to be with the painting in person. There was an underworld to the painting, and it was never explicit, but the energy of it was absolutely as clear as a bell, as clear as an apple on a table. And that, to my 10-year-old mind, was so comforting. It was so comforting to know that we could recognize energy and that it was real. And we could also recognize deception and hiding, and it's also real. These are things that children, know, but are usually not told. And so that's...
So Susanna, so that makes me think about how, I've always seen you as, you have this art historical background, you're very well read. and you also, so you have both this, I think, both sides of the brain with, I think, the writing and the eyeball. And I'm very jealous of that because I'm kind of lopsided on my brain area, but so this is interesting because I do think that, that the visuals can fill in what maybe some words can't, but then obviously writing also has its other kind of power and specificity and poetry, right? Poetry. I mean, I often find, maybe if I was forced to write, I'd be a poet. Like maybe, I don't know, E. E. Cummings, or, I like haikus, I like but I guess this is something that fascinates me about you. So has there been maybe, how have you been able to reconcile? How do they feed one another, in terms of your more literary and your kind of eyeball side?
Well, it's mental pictures.
Mental pictures, okay.
Yeah, so, and also tales and fairy tales, myth and fairy tale, because you can find, I find, everyone needs a source of energy. And I think for me, there's a natural world, with that just a terrible and inaccurate way of saying everything that's not human.
Right.
And, consequently, my joy in the project of your work, which transcends its, great formal qualities, it is something that generates what I need, which was the energy. And I find when, I'm essentially a country girl, although moving all the time, lots of different kind of countries, not countrysides, not countries, countrysides. I don't know. Oh, you know why? Because when I was a little girl, when I was very young, my mother would read to me in the afternoons. I'd sit in the rocking chair when I was a toddler, and she'd read to me, and she'd read poems from the little golden book. And then I would sit, we had a radio, and in the radio, we had a tiny house, and between the two rooms, there was shelves, and on the top shelf was a radio. And this was, again, the early 50s. And the radio would be on, and there would be stories on the radio. And I would sit in the door stoop between the two rooms and sit at the base of the radio and listen to the radio stories. The Shadow, or I can't remember the names of them, but soap operas, and Life of Riley, et cetera, and music. So I think those early experiences with language were so emotionally fulfilling. That reading was my friend. Some people have people for friends. I had reading for a friend.
So this fascinates me because here's where we actually have slightly different paths. Is that for me, I'm dyslexic. I'm not so severely dyslexic that but reading is very difficult and complicated words, and it's not because I'm bilingual. I anyway, and I didn't realize, but it's like, I didn't get joy from reading a book, because if it was a complicated word, it was difficult. And so I tended to like books that had pictures, this idea of, the book, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, I would, because it needed to have a picture on the front, and it needed to have pictures on the inside. And it's not that I didn't, often I always felt that the illustrations never did the book justice, right? But they were there, right? And somehow, but I've always been a sort of look first and then find something to read or learn about later, as opposed to, and this is interesting to me because I do talk a lot about this with students, and I do think that there's two primary ways people, are in the world, which is some people have their first ideas in their head, right? And then it sort of manifests, itself out. And then other people, it's some sort of maybe more intuitive or something. And then they have to do the work of, learning about why and what, and kind of contextualize it and then make it you make sense, right? So and it, and one's, no one's better than, no one's not better than the other, they're just different. And so early on, that was just something I'm definitely that kind of eyeball, but I think part of it is I wanted reading to be more pleasurable. And it wasn't, but I love stories and I love storytellings and I love hearing people tell stories. And I'm fascinated because, it's definitely an art and a gift. And a good one when you hear it and it hits you in the heart, right? And it's, they're so powerful, and something that's well written is an art form, but it's, I stick to painting.
Well, I when we see each other, I'll digress a little bit about this, because I think many people who are artists are dyslexic, and you'll notice this in your students. It just means that people are visually attuned to the center and not left to right. And this is a good thing for visual artists. And many people who become visual artists are what is called dyslexic, but it's a real talent in terms of seeing holistically. What it's called dyslexia really is the idea that the predominance of holistic vision that isn't, moving from left to right as it does in the Roman alphabet. But you remind me a little bit, because I was with a student. And I have an old, not very good painting that I had to archive called Ezekiel's Wheel. And so this was my assistant. She said, "What's that?" And I went to the Professor Google. I love that spiritual of Ezekiel's Wheel. And I found two things. One is Louis Armstrong, who's riffing on the chapter of Ezekiel's Wheel and singing and playing, composed a piece around it, and Johnny Cash. And in the Johnny Cash recording, he is reciting the verses from the Bible of Ezekiel's Wheel, of that vision. And I was just effing smacked at the strangeness of that narrative. It was like apocalyptic and so visual and so stirring. I thought, why have I forgotten that? It was, the wheel within a wheel, way up in the air. The little wheel turns by night, and the big wheel turns by faith. So it was, anyway, it just made me think of that. You just made me think of this, sources of pictures that are linguistic. Right. And I too, it's just that I was alone for a good bit of my childhood. And so I taught, my mother would do the picture books, and I'd listen to her and look at the pictures. So I developed my own way of deciphering letters. And when I got to school, I was doing it wrong. And so I was a failure at reading in school. But you know how it is, you figure it out for yourself. Yeah. And so that's funny, because it was always a problem, and I hated school. And here I am, the academic in school for the rest of my life. Do you remember some of the images from your picture book? Any picture books? Do you remember any of those?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting because one of, and maybe it was more of an age thing, but I know this is kind of cliched, but like I really liked The Secret Garden.
Oh, yes. Oh, wow.
I know, and I wanted so badly. I still want a studio in the woods, I still want my secret garden, I still want to find something that's, people have left unabandoned or just don't care about, and I go and I tend to it and I bring it back to life. So maybe this is my mission through my painting, is they're all little bits of that secret garden that I
have a place for you. I have a place for you. The IPAR, it's a residency out in the woods in Connecticut.
Send it to me.
They are, I'll send it to you. It's a kind of a new residency, but it's in this wilderness. Mm-hmm. The studios are quite, anyway. Oh, yes, I'll send it to you right now, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like just images, just good illustrations. I mean, I love picture books. I love, I did enjoy going to the museum, and you mentioned Mass earlier for kind of what, how they can tell stories of different inner and outer and emotional sort of conditions of one person. And I was fascinated as a young child. I would go to the Houston Art Museum and spent so much time down with the African collection and the pre-Columbian collection. They were the things that spoke to me the most. And I think there's that element of that personification of something beyond words, that's beyond a specific reality or even a specificity of one moment, right? It stands for this thing that we all experience and we can all identify with it. But I was very fascinated by by this idea of those images were just powerful, I guess is what I want to say. And but I have to say that I'm always envious of people. So this all makes sense as mental pictures, the reading, and going back to your backgrounds, about the burning fires behind your, thinking about, really spending time thinking about the figure, right? The ground and the figure, right? For you, that ground is sort of the context, the story within where this figure is going to be for this particular image, right? But for me, I kind of joke, but I have like no imagination. I don't. It's not that I can't plan or think about things or imagine ideas, but in terms of them becoming interesting visual products, that's never been the case. My idea is always more interesting in my head than a painting if I were to produce it. And yet I can often paint something that I have no expectations towards, and it becomes way more interesting than I could have imagined. Right. So I think this is wonderful that you have been able to marry these two sides in a way that's so interesting and powerful.
Well, I think this is the same with Brian, and we haven't talked about your work, which I have known for a very long
this
time.
isn't about me.
I know it's not, but I have to just say I knew your very early work, which was always wonderful. But you are somebody also that is verbally and in a literary sense quite so capable, but you are also an amazing artist. So and of long standing and from the beginning. And I think you just do when the door opens, you go through it.
Yeah. And it changes. It's a long game. So speaking of like holistic, and what Lilian was talking about with like vision and how artists see differently, I still remember. So, Susanna was my painting teacher in 97 and 98 at SAIC. And I still remember like two lessons which were sparked by this conversation. One with learning how to use our peripheral vision and holding like the pencil to the left or the right, and then also practicing like exercising these muscles. I remember that. And then also too, when you were talking about, both of us were talking about how it's different today, as an artist with these cascade of images that were, and the avalanche of information. Whereas thinking about light and color, and Susanna, one lesson or one class I remember is you were just talking about the television set and the light from the television set and how that just changes everything. And I still like, even when I'm looking, driving at night and everything, or at home and checking out, like taking the dog out at night, seeing all these blinds illuminated by these television sets. And then those things are like colors. And I'm remembering that this lesson of, it's contextual, like color is relational. Yeah. And this is like a good point for us to kind of like talk about to cap this conversation about, the relational aspect of color in our perception. like Lilian with your Albers, and then also Susanna, it's like your paintings with your forward and ground, figure ground, and how they blend together, but they're also like color studies and in a way, and about the relationship. So you decide who wants to go first to kind of speak to that, whether it's talking about Albers and his, but how that enters into your work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, since you mentioned Albers, I'll start by saying that I technically am Joseph Albers' artistic granddaughter. And I say that because in mathematics, you actually describe yourself as someone who is, studied under a person who might have then studied under another person. So I studied when I was at Penn at University of Pennsylvania, I studied under Cy Silman, who he had studied under Joseph Albers. And not only that, but he had also, Silman and Irv Ness, I think is the name, he helped print a series for a few years of some of the Joseph Albers square. Now, I didn't know that. I mean, I actually did know he worked with Albers at the time. But anyway, I got to take color theory with him, and he said very, very nice things to me. He thought I was really a natural colorist and all of this. But, so I take this class. This was like now my 4th or 5th color theory class because, the 80s, right? It was Bauhausian design. I mean, you take your black and white 2D, your colored 2D, your color theory, your advanced color theory, another color theory in graduate school. So all this color theory was good and nice for me, but I didn't want to write a book or think about chemistry or all this stuff. I really wanted to have applied color theory. And for me, I think the reason why people thought that I had a good sense of color or balance is because, like, you go back to color is relative. There isn't one way to make, you can make something look bluer by not just making it bluer. You can make something else look more red or orange or a number of other things, right? There's always more than one answer to how to solve a problem. And with color, it is all relative. And so, and I guess I just intuitively kind of knew that, but I also somehow had a very good sense of balancing or doing things the way you might not have expected them to be done, but they still solve themselves. So anyway, so I come to painting and I come to art with all this knowledge and baggage, a good baggage. It's good stuff in that bag, right, of color theory. And I've never really been able to use it direct or in a way that seemed obvious, because it's, of course, in all of my work. It's why my work doesn't seem to fall apart. It's why my work seems to almost have that sense of image emerging out of paint, but it's not quite chaotic. Well, it's because I understand that I can put one little red dot in a corner and all of a sudden everything is in balance and everything is in its place enough that it's not wrong enough, right? It's right enough. So it really wasn't until when I started thinking about the Cuba work, right? When I had gotten, I had finally been able to paint in Cuba on site in 2017. And I had gotten a Joe Mitchell residency in New Orleans for the following month. Excuse me. And my plan had always been, I'm going to work my ass off in Cuba to try to make as many little, had to be on acrylic, on paper. And then I was going to take this work back to the Joan Mitchell Center. And instead of working on site like I normally do, I said, why work? It's only 3 weeks. Don't go out into let's actually use the studio and think about processing this work. And can I make work from this work in a studio setting? And so I had brought that dirt, with me and stuff. But what happened was I did the first one just on a color, a green, right? It's the one actually that William Cordova liked so much that you had in the show, right? That big, this was the one scene I kind of had to do. It made sense. But then it was like, now what? Now what do I do with color? Color is such a big part of all my paintings, right? I have all these, 60 pigments on my palette. I love color, right? And here now I have dirt. So how does color have meaning? And so all of a sudden I realized that when I was looking through the photos I took of Cuba, a lot of them were of the flowers or the houses that are painted these, very intense colors, right? I don't go take many pictures of landscapes. I take them of things. So I thought, well, maybe that's it. Maybe that's the way to kind of work this in. And so I took those images so that like the pieces that you have that have color, all those colors are based on the house colors from the places where those houses were in the environments that I was painting in Viñales. And so I'm taking this kind of Caribbean aesthetic. So the choices aren't made to just make something, vibrate or something. They're based on, I try to do that a little bit, but they're based on those colors. And then I superimposed with the Cuban pigment that. So all of a sudden, I was able to think about color theory, my interest in color. And I also found a way to use the grid, although I do bust out of the grid a little bit, but use it in a way that was productive, right? Because I think I always had this love-hate relationship. More love than hate, but like grids, I could never be, I never liked perfection. And as much as like I would love Agnes Martin's grids, I would never want to do, I'm glad she did them so I didn't have to, right? I would never use tape on my paintings to make a grid painting either, right? I'm glad other people do it. It looks beautiful, but I will never do that, right? So all of these like grids and stuff, they're all hand done. They're not about perfection, but it allowed me to play with color again and have that sort of, nod to my own upbringing, educational upbringing in a way that wasn't, always fighting against it. It was now, okay, I'm over it. I've stopped fighting it now. I'm using it in my own work, my own way. So I don't know if I quite answered your question, but there you go. That's me, color, grids, Albers, squares.
Oh, that says my son, who was like a son to Albers. He also was a person that worked on the book, the Bible, the Albers Bible, right, where everything's hand silk screen, and also color-aid paper.
Yes, I have so much of that still.
I know. I was a free study failure.
It's magical really when it happens. Yeah,
it is. Well, yes, it is magical. It actually is. And it's wonderful seeing that in back of you on your screensaver. It's really beautiful. It is really great, that very slight shift between the yellow, like the vanilla color, and the kind of violet color, and then the bright yellow. Yeah, it's really great because if I go all the way out to the edge of the screen, it makes that vanilla color look warmer. And if I don't, it looks very cool. So it's kind of you're Albersing as I'm looking at you.
Yeah, and I want to do more of these little Albersy things. I just haven't. But yeah, it's the impact, right? The impact. Albers impact. Both the Albers, right? Their impacts on understanding the real element and powers of design, right? Of simple elements that really can do a lot. Mm-hmm. And in a way are almost infinite, right? In the combinations one can think of, but is exciting. And I'm glad I'm able to, pay a type of homage that in my own way to it.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Well, you certainly do. Because I think the idea in your paintings is energy. And I see color as energy. I was a terrible colorist for years and years and years, long time. I love music. I'm like really, even married a musician at one point. Don't do that. And, you got to separate the artist from the art. But color is like that, or like food. Mm-hmm. It is energy. It is actual. It's light. It's energy, and it energizes or quiets. It is the essence of expression. The ability to perceive color is one of the most precious gifts we have as people who see, have eyes. And, I'm so great. I'm continually grateful for my sense of sight. But I was as a painter, I was for a long time, it's just not a good colorist. I had the idea, but trying to find relational color and enough be able to interpret what I was seeing chromatically in an expressive way without going off the radar in terms of relationality, in terms of the relation of the colors in each work. And it's the relationship between all of the colors that creates the feeling and meaning. But I was not able to do that for a long time. I could try to mime what I was seeing, the colors that I saw, but it was just took forever for me to be able to really do practice what Albus preaches, which is the understanding that one color can mediate the meaning of all the other colors. You could have one color at one time in one place, and it could, as in Clifford Still, it can really rule rule 10 feet of canvas, which the Clifford Still in Chicago does. But one time I was running a class actually at Oxbow on landscape and figure painting. So I was teaching when I was still a sucky colorist. And Wilbur Newald was a visiting artist, and I was walking through that little town near Oxbow with him and his wife, and it was sunset. And he just stopped. And, he was like one of those oracular teachers who that he was pronouncing, but he said, look. And I was looking at this crappy little town, which was, full of fudge shops and, souvenirs. And, it was like, this sort of corny place. But he said, look. And it was sunset, and the fudge shop had pink awnings, and the sky was pink, and he was pointing out the neutral colors that were reflecting that pinkness in various ways. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it just opened my eyes in a practical sense, and I had all the theory, but I couldn't apply it. I was just in case. I knew it was there, but I couldn't do it. And that afternoon, he just showed me something, that this place, which was iconographically and was, it was a horrible tourist town. But at that moment, it was this world of pink. It was like a Matisse. And looking at a Matisse painting, which I infinitely preferred to this town, but at that moment it was just as astounding. So then I knew kind of where to go to work on to see neutrals as having warmth and coolness, and really try to mix that. So many years later, once I started doing the night paintings, that really upped my game, because at night you have to wait for color. You have to wait for the shapes and edges to separate, so you can identify whether they're warm or cool, and what color is this a green dark, is this a blue dark, is this a red dark. And obviously where there might be one, like if somebody's watching TV in a house on the horizon, bluish, that would be like a color I could name, but the rest of the colors at night are unnameable. And that's how I got to work on color. Once Wilbur showed me unnameable colors that were moving away from a certain saturation, and I, so it took a long time for me, really. I really long time, decades, honestly.
I think that's the name of our next show together, Susanna. Unnameable colors.
Yes, that's right. Oh my goodness. I know, I love those now. I never understood it. I'm ashamed to say that when I first started painting, I really look at Rembrandt and I thought, oh, all that brown. And but that's a confession.
Yeah.
How could I, right? Could I?
Yeah. Well, Suzanne, I'm sure glad you worked all that out before you taught me. So because that was the year before that you did the night paintings, and it's like so yeah. Otherwise, I would have a completely different opinion here.
Those old brown Van Dykes, etc.
Yeah.
Why look at Vermeer?
Oh my goodness. Well, I just want to thank you both for like your time, and also, again, for like sharing your work with us here. So many people just had so many, just an abundance of positive things to say, and how it just spoke to a range of audiences and ages, and and backgrounds of people who came in here. So that's like something that's always, you can't control it. When you let go of the work and you let it out there, you just hope it speaks to hope it speaks to somebody and stuff. So thank you both.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to do this, first of all, because it's great to see Lilian. I never can see her enough. It's great to see you. I can never see you enough.
Well, we're going to make up for that when I go up to New York more.
It's such a joy, and thank you, Brian, for trusting me to put to the show, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, I can speak from experience that you done good with Brian, and Brian, I mean, it's always a pleasure to work with you. And when he phoned me up and was like, gave me heads up, I'm like, sure, I'd love to do anything with you because it's going to be good. I mean, you have good instincts for things. And so I really appreciate that. And it's shown in all these, really interesting shows that you've done and are doing. And so, looking forward to seeing kind of more of your work too.
And I want to wish anybody that's listening to this conversation, to really stay connected to the mosque. It's a unique opportunity.
Beautiful space.
Don't let this resource go unwatched. You never know what you're going to find. So you may look at the roster and say, oh, maybe that's not my thing. Don't pay attention to that thought. Get yourself in there because it's a unique opportunity, and these don't always come in life.
Well, thank you. We have I'll stop right now so we can